I think he just is looking to be.
Anything?
Which hold my attention.
Snapping at
Trying to
you.
get my attention.
That would be
It
an
is,
awfully
I
rude
mean-
interjection of me.
I'm disappointed for.
It's not registering. Okay, go.
Check, check,
I'd love
check,
to have
check,
him,
check,
but I
check,
get it.
check. Yeah? Okay. Got that one? Okay. Sorry.
What do you think the chances are neither one of us will knock our mics over today? See if we can get through
I wouldn't bet against it, I'll put it that way, but
I think they blocked you from doing that. Hi, how are you? Oh, this is awesome.
If anything has a place, I have larger posters.
That's fantastic.
great, thanks.
I do.
Okay, I'll go grab some.
All right.
Yeah. How, I mean, just like this big?
Great photo. Yeah, it is, isn't it?
Yeah, I'll put one up on the.
It's chilly in here. Is anybody else cold?
Yes, hi, very nice.
Hey, Bob.
How you doing?
Doing well.
Good. Anything exciting going on?
Just the way this,
This is gonna be, because we have a presentation.
Really?
her son lives over, he lives in London, but he has, yeah,
Barcelona?
no, it was about 12 hours southwest of Madrid.
Sounds awesome.
Very rural,
Yeah.
old, a lot of old ruins.
Worse than ever. Disparities of interest. Good there? Yep. Sorry, guys.
Sorry.
Very rude. Good, Jim? Okay. Yep.
Okay.
So we're going to call to order the Police Department Commission meeting for April 17th, 6 p.m. Are there any additions or modifications to the amended agenda? Okay.
I think we officially just do need to get the amended agenda.
Okay. So, do we have a motion to approve the amended agenda?
So moved.
A second?
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay, great. We have public forum. Is anyone here for public forum? Okay, we are halfway done with the agenda.
Oh,
So, Chief's report, please.
We're gonna have a community barbecue on. Did you have the poster here? I saw one of the posters around.
I have.
Right there.
Yep. These are coming along.
May 16th. You want to actually? Can I ask the person who should take the credit for doing a lot of the work issue this aspect of the report?
Yes.
Things are looking good. It's at Pomeroy and North Street, so we're gonna do a bit of a block party, but also have the park available. So we have lined up food from Al's French Fries, as he's done the last several years. He's been a huge supporter, as well as other sushi rolls, hopefully some dumplings, and then music lined up, and lots of community departments with trucks on display. So things are coming together. So spread the word. There's a Facebook page.
great.
Please share and come. Hopefully the weather will be beautiful. Green.
Good.
Yeah. By May, who knows? Chief Wright, do you want to talk about a recent passing in the department?
David Bean was one of our full-time dispatchers.
Hey.
He's actually spent more than 30 years as a fireman for the Burlington Fire Department, retired in 1996 as a captain. Actually after 1996, he started here in 1996 as a part-time dispatcher, and in 2015 was hired as a full-time dispatcher, following the retirement of his wife's body ache. About 2 months ago, he was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer and passed away
2 or 3 days ago, right?
Sunday.
Yeah.
Actually Sunday night. So, his services were Friday in Shelburne. So this is, I don't remember the last time a full service active employee has passed away. So it leaves us, short dispatcher and we're all set.
That's right. I guess that's the extent of the chief's report. I know we wanted to talk about car stop race data. I guess I will say one thing. I feel like I've introduced everybody. I know you met Kayla Donahue last month. Have you been here to one of these meetings yet? Okay, great. So Nancy Stetson is the new, for shorthand, Eric Fowler. Some of you may remember Eric, the department's full-time crime and data analyst. Nancy comes from, why don't you please go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself.
I came most recently from UC Berkeley. I have a master's in public policy there, but I was born and raised here in Vermont, down in Addison County. And yeah.
That's it. So welcome aboard. One of the reasons why we waited a little bit to bring Nancy on board is because she's, you have 2 kids, right?
Yeah.
But a new mom as well. One of the kids is how old now?
Oh, she's 5 months.
5
yesterday.
months?
Yeah.
So a lot going on, and Nancy does a great job of balancing it and bringing a lot of value to our work. So welcome aboard.
Congratulations on both fronts and welcome.
Thank you.
Glad you're here.
So if you look at it, we have a great team of analysts, and that's one of the reasons they're here tonight. We'll be talking about some of our data, but we have Nancy, Kayla Donahue, who we divide with the Opioid Alliance. She does opioid-related analyses and helps out with analyses in general. And of course, Eric Cradaville, who is our crime and data analyst. When we approved an educational leave, he was one of the first folks to take advantage of it, and now he's paying his penance, so to speak. Also, Lieutenant Mike Warren, I don't know if you know Mike. Mike was the Detective Bureau lieutenant for a while, and now he's working under Chief Wright as the new administrative lieutenant. I don't know if you want to introduce yourself there, but you've been.
Yeah, I'm Mike Warren. I have been here at the department, it'll be 20 years in June, so I've spent quite a bit of time here. The majority of my career has been uniform division and as an
Yeah, there it is.
Thank you all for your service.
Thanks. I don't know if you want to go to the next agenda item. I don't have much more by way of an update. So, if no one minds, one of the things Christine asked to have on the agenda was the most recent car stop race data from Stephanie Seguino's 2014-2015 report. I thought it's good to talk about that. It certainly got a lot of coverage in the news. It looked at statewide car stop data from 13 and 14. So we can discuss that as well. There were some interesting findings in there. But I thought as long as we're going to be discussing that, it would be helpful to discuss, as the Burlington Police Commission, the Burlington Police Department data from 2016 and 2017. So what we have now is our data all the way up to the end of 2017, which is 4 months ago. It's all been analyzed. We can compare it to the statewide trends. We can compare it historically to our trends. We put together a report about it, and if you don't mind, I think we'll walk through it, but the analysts put a lot of work into this. You have the written product in front of you. We can go through it, and then, of course, take questions during or after and see where it goes. So this is an assessment of equity in policing. Next slide, please. So one of the things that we realize is that there's disparate outcomes in several facets of motor vehicle enforcement. Some of them have explanations that we can discuss. Others, the explanations are slower in coming. But one of the things we did we were working on these all along, but since I got here, I know I took ownership of trying to do a lot of them myself and our administration. Hey, guys. I don't know if you want to set up, so maybe we can just stall for a little bit while the news sets up. Is this on? Yes, sir. Good? All right, thanks. All right. So there are some things we did to help ensure that we'd have more equity and less disparity in the outcomes of our traffic enforcement. The first thing we did is we gave cops enhanced training in interdiction techniques. So that is, if cops are pulling a car over at the side of the road and they're making assessments about the level of suspicion that they have towards a driver, the vehicle, or passengers, that it's based on good investigative techniques. It's based on knowledge of how to ask questions and interview people. It's based on proper law so that the searches are more likely to be fruitful when they do conduct them. The second thing is we've had really frank conversations about the explanations and causes and remedies of implicit bias. So one of the things we did is, number one, just in-house talk about implicit bias. But as you also know, as of recently, we had Dr. Bryant Marks come to give every Burlington employee, plus community members, plus other officers outside the department training in identifying and remedying implicit bias. But that was sort of like the capstone of conversations we were having over the course of the last at least 2 years at roll calls, where we're talking about the fact that, bias exists in everyone, not just the police, but people in society in various ways. But it's acutely felt in policing because police have bias plus power, and that has implications when people act based on their implicit biases. We talked to cops about the magnitude of these disparities, right? That like a 20% spread in the outcomes of searches has implications that many people find troubling and that are, in fact, difficult to explain if you look at them on their face. We looked at the stress that motorists are under when you stop them, no matter who they are. We talked about the perception that motorists of color have of the police, that it's historical as well as local, based here. We also did something which about a year and a half ago, we gave officers access to the outcomes of their own stops, and we allowed them to compare those outcomes to their peers anonymously. So you could see, as a driver, it's about a year and a half ago, you could see as an officer who you're stopping, the race of who you're stopping, the outcomes by race of who you're stopping, and then see how that compared to to your peers. So you understand the magnitude of this, but you also understand your performance. And then we also talked about implicit bias. So those are 4 discrete interventions that we did in order to try to enhance equity in the Burlington Police Department.
Chief, can I ask a
Yeah,
question,
sure.
or should I wait?
No, please, go ahead.
Well, I mean, when you're describing that, I'm just wondering if there's a piece of that that is like supervision too, or are people just monitoring it on their own?
No, I mean, so when officers do car stops, they do them predominantly by themselves. They initiate the stop by themselves. You have solo cars, and so and most car stops go on unsupervised, right? Unless you're going to arrest somebody or a significant incident happens, you want to take the car back for a search warrant. It's a transaction that happens throughout American policing with minimal supervision. So I know you're maybe asking a slightly different question.
Well,
but
I mean, I'm saying when somebody's reviewing their data, when you were
Right.
just describing, like they can compare it to other officers' data unanimously or whatever, which
Anonymously,
I
yeah,
think
yeah, yeah.
that makes sense. I
Right.
mean, yeah, anonymously. But I'm just wondering if there's a piece that.
Well, it's hard. I mean, it comes from myself and Chief Burke, right? And it comes from the headquarters section. What's difficult to do is to have to tell a sergeant, like, sergeants are good at finding explicit bias, right? Or reacting to the way an officer behaves around other people. But to say there's a spread in the outcomes of who you're giving tickets to and who you're giving warnings to, I want a sergeant to be on top of that. You can see what I'm saying. It's hard to understand what the sergeant would say without knowing more, because you'll see later on in the presentation, suspended licenses have a huge effect on the outcome of a stop. And so, I guess what you're asking is, does a sergeant sit down and have a conversation with an officer about a disparity in race, or does a lieutenant do that? And the answer is no. I just think it's a really difficult conversation that those supervisors don't know necessarily how to have in a really constructive way. But I know that, like, we've been giving it a lot of thought, meaning me, Chief Wright, Chief Burke, now more so, Lieutenant Warren and Lieutenant Lawson. So that's the level at which it's happening, at the command level. Does that?
Yeah, and I think, I mean, I also, and you and I could maybe talk about this more. I've been involved in a lot of this stuff,
Yeah.
even recently with the panel. We're hoping that, I actually resigned, but I'm hoping that there will be some more models in like systemic ways to integrate
Right.
supervision into the reviewing of data. And I think the Vermont State Police, I've heard maybe that they're doing some of that where, I mean, and whatever the supervision it was, whether it was a sergeant sitting down with somebody, or I just feel like it's information that should be used
Right.
that way.
No, I see what you're saying, and I guess to be candid, it's a very, very difficult conversation for supervisors to have. You don't have training in these issues of equity and public administration, or the comfort level to really talk frankly about them. I think until you've been doing this a while and rise through the ranks, it's like we select chiefs based on their ability to engage with these issues, but we'd have to develop a curriculum around it and really create a comfort level, and so we don't have that now.
And Chief Burke was really good about sharing that at our Kaleo meeting, the last meeting that he was at. He was really candid and shared his own process of reviewing it and trying
Right.
to process what was going on. So,
No, so it's a good point. I mean, ideally, we would be able to address it at every level of supervision, but we're not there yet. Want to go to the next slide? Thanks, Eric. So these are measures of discrimination or possible bias. Are people of color more likely to be stopped in the first place? Are they more likely to be ticketed rather than warned? Are they more likely to be searched? And then we didn't use the term gold standard. It was one of the things that Professor Seguino used. But the gold standard is not the search per se, but the hit rate, which is the likelihood of finding contraband given a search. So you could argue that probable cause is probable cause, and you're always entitled to act on probable cause. But if you're acting on probable cause and it's not bearing fruit or not being successful as often with drivers of color as white drivers, then what was imputing that cause in the first place, right? The worry is that blackness or brownness imputes a level of criminal suspicion in and of itself that's unwarranted in cops. It's a definition of profiling. So differences in the hit rate are often taken as evidence of at least implicit bias. And one of the things that Professor Seguino said in VPR to VPR is when you find consistently that drivers of color are more likely to be searched but less likely to be found with contraband, often an inference is made that this is the result of some kind of bias, implicit or explicit bias. And I think this is really compelling when you look at the research around car stops, and race data, this is a standard that people go to as one of the most telling standards of bias. And it's something that me personally, as well as Professor Seguino, when she's come here to talk to our cops, as well as Chief Burke, have said to our officers and contended with as a indication of bias. So next slide, please. So these are the data from 2012 onward. Are black drivers less likely to get out of a stop with only a warning? The gold standard for all drivers is to get a warning when they get stopped, right? We all hope for it. And so the question is, you go, whew, to what extent are black drivers likely to get a warning versus white drivers? When you look at the straight data, you can see that black drivers are the lighter line, white drivers are the darker line. You can see that white drivers across the years are more likely to get a warning. Black drivers are less likely to get a warning, more likely to get a ticket. That's a fact, right? And I know Stephanie pointed this out. This is our data, and it prevails over 5 years. There's a point, though, something I think that's important to control for, that if we're looking for justice and equity in Vermont, we have to contend with, and that's license violations. So next slide, please. This is the idea. If you have a suspended license, or no license at all, but especially a suspended license, the chances of you getting a warning instead of a ticket are tiny. The reason why is because you have a suspension because you failed to answer prior tickets. If you have a warrant, if you have no license, you shouldn't be on the road in the first place. So the thought in jurisprudence, and I know there's a lot of attorneys here and people with a legal background, is not declining or less serious consequences to escalating behavior. It's the same or greater consequences to escalating behavior. So if you get a ticket and don't answer it, get a ticket and don't answer it, get a ticket and don't answer it, your license gets suspended. When you get pulled over again, the answer is not, we know you don't answer tickets, so now we're just going to let you go. It's, you're getting another ticket. Or if it's a criminal suspension, you're getting an arrest. So when you factor out suspensions and you factor out not having a license, just those two things, the warning rates collapse. Some years, black drivers are warned more often than whites. Some years, there's a few 3 percentage point difference, and some years they're equal. Over the course of the years from 2012 to 2017, black drivers and white drivers are statistically equally likely to get a warning. That's if you control for license violations. So it's an important caveat. But when you look at license violations, cops give tickets for license violations something like 96% of the time. We talk later on in the report about there are social and racial justice implications of why people end up with suspended licenses. But if you are a driver, so the bottom line is if you're a Vermont driver or if you're driving in Vermont and you get pulled over and your license is not suspended, if you have a driver's license and it's not a suspended license, the chance of you getting a warning or a ticket year to year is equal whether you're black or white, right? But there's a whole other can of worms to open up with social justice and equity and why people have suspended licenses, and we'll discuss that.
I mean, and especially when you think about the overall demographics of Vermont.
Right.
There's not even a lot of us here, so kind of adds like a layer.
Well, this is a percent thing, though,
Right,
so
yeah,
it's
true,
the rate,
true.
so it's not the overall number, but the point, so no, but you're right nonetheless.
I mean, and if we already know that there are disparities in traffic stops over the past decades, as long as
Yeah.
I've been looking at it, that adds to the explanation about why people have suspended licenses.
Sure, no, that's right.
Yes.
Chief, question. It's black and white. Where are in these numbers? Where are Latinos, Asians?
One of the reasons why we concentrated on black and white, and it's a great question because there are many races and many colors and many shades of racial identity, is that the numbers for Hispanic and Asian are so tiny that it's sort of not. It's when it comes to suspensions, it's not responsible to draw statistical conclusions about it. We're talking about
some of the information over previous years really showed that some of those groups were being overlooked in terms of
Well,
contraband.
you can look at on the back of the report. There's the actual numbers for the last 3 years. So we're not trying to suppress those numbers or say that they don't exist or they're not important.
Yeah.
It's just looking at the two most predominant
Thank you.
numbers. I mean, if you look at,
Yeah.
there were in 2017, for example, just to get like no Hispanics searched, and one Asian driver searched. Again, in 2016, there were no Hispanics searched, 4 Asian drivers searched. These are really, really small numbers. I don't know, Nancy or Kayla, if you want to talk about the problem of numbers and statistical significance for a moment.
And it's still officer perception too.
Right.
That's,
Right. Well, it just comes down to when there's just, if the numbers are small enough, it means that one more ticket or one less ticket could change what we're looking at. It could change the percent a lot. So that's why. And we could look at this graph for Asian and Hispanics too, but the black versus white was just the most interesting comparison, at least.
There's the most power behind it. It has the most statistical power. It wouldn't be, I mean, I think it's, people who, trained statisticians would caution you about saying anything about what's happening with Asian and Hispanic drivers just based on the tiny number. I don't know if you agree with that. I mean, if you disagree, I need to know. You're my statistician, but that's the...
Well, I definitely agree for when we're looking at searches in the next couple graphs.
Right.
For tickets and warnings, there's probably a decent number, but the patterns were strongest with these two groups.
All right, you want to go to the next slide? So this is just putting those two last slides together so you can see what license violations do. And to put a finer point on it, when our car stops show that when Burlington police officers make a stop, 6% of the time a white motorist has a suspended license. 15% of the time a black motorist has a suspended license. That's not a value judgment or casting aspersions or saying anything negative about the black driving population. I think there's a big, we'll talk about, you can think about a lot of reasons from, I'm just kind of saving them for last, but why in Vermont a person of color feels awkward fighting a traffic ticket or doesn't have the money to pay it.
got it in the first place.
What's that?
Or got it in the first place.
Well, but if they're likely, if you factor out the license violations, there's likely to get a warning as a ticket in the first place. So they're no more likely statistically to get a warning or a ticket in the first place.
I don't know if you're asking the question that I was wondering about is, was there
The
any
question
work-
is, they're more likely to get stopped in
any
the first
work done,
place.
any work done on why people are actually getting stopped? Because you're talking about how they're treated when they're
Right.
stopped, but, you know, are people of color stopped more often?
So they are. They're stopped at a greater rate of their population. Right.
Figured that out like 10 years ago.
Yeah. No, then it happens every year. Yeah, that's
No, but I
right.
mean, that's not an underlying insignificance to this
Right.
either, right?
No, it's not. It's not. So one of the interesting things, if you look at the data too, is that we're stopping fewer people overall, including fewer drivers of color. In 2015, there were 460 black drivers stopped. In 2016, there were 382 black drivers stopped. 2017, there were 293 black drivers stopped. So that's, 167 fewer stops of black motorists over the course of the 3 years. So there's just fewer interactions with motorists of color happening in the first place as we go through year to year.
Do you have statistics on reasons for stops?
So we do, yeah, right.
And-
So,
Oh, go ahead, please.
no, please, but
Oh, it's just, I don't imagine, finding out somebody doesn't have a license, you don't ride around checking license plates.
well, part of it too, I think there's in a city like this, and Eric can talk to this, there are some, and Mike too, there are some cops who know driver's licenses are suspended when they see them,
Oh, sure. Yeah.
right?
You'll hear it on the radio, you'll hear an officer saying, is so-and-so still suspended? Because, I mean, this town is small enough
Yeah, got
that
it.
you'll recognize,
Got it.
vehicles and drivers.
That could have a compounding effect on
Yeah.
getting stopped and pulled over and getting more tickets, right?
Yeah, I mean, every time the guy drives, he's,
Right, so another thing to follow up on would be, as the commissioner pointed out, is why people are getting stopped in the first place. We want to see if drivers of a particular race are more likely to get pulled over for equipment violations, right? More likely to get pulled over for having a suspended or expired registration or expired inspection. Again, because that deals with the ability to pay for things, it deals with the ability to take off work and have the type of job. I'm going to spend the day getting my car inspected. Or again, like registering a car in Vermont is expensive. I found that out the hard way. I was astounded how expensive it was. And if that's the reason for getting pulled over, and then you get tickets, it starts a vicious cycle, which is what you're talking about. One of the indications we may be coming out of a cycle like that is just year after year, we're stopping fewer cars in general, and we're stopping fewer motorists of color and fewer white motorists for that matter. So hit rates. Hit rates are when an officer believes that he or she has probable cause to make a stop, what percent of the time do they find contraband in the stop? And I'll give you an example of something that people find troubling, and I agree with, which is that if you stop white motorists and decide to search them, and you're getting contraband 68% of the time. But then you're stopping black motorists and deciding to search them and getting contraband 54% of the time. The worry is that, as a statistically significant difference, you're imputing a suspicion on your encounters with black motorists that's not corresponding with the recovery of contraband. So that's an indication that there's a bias. It's something about the quality of the encounter that has nothing to do with the objective investigation is yielding a suspicion. And one of the things that could be is the race of the person. And there are all sorts of stereotypes that could play into that. We've all talked about them, like, oh, this could be a guy up from New York City bringing drugs into town. I want to search him, or hey, I smell some marijuana on this white driver and I smell it on this black driver, but I'm going to pursue the lead on this black driver because man, he could have something in the car because of a certain perception about the person's race. Like, that's an indication of potential bias. We were really, really frank with cops about this. Every time I speak about race data, I say this is one of the most important concerns we have. Stops are intrusive. They're very, very stressful. And they have big consequences. So we have to be very careful about how we perform them. We've also done better interdiction training. So what you see here, we could go all the way back, but we started with 2015. The disparities increase as we go back, not tremendously, but they're more than 20% spread when we go back. 2015, when I got here, there was a 14% spread in the hit rate. In 2016, it's not significant, but it's worth noticing that they reversed. Like, officers were 73% likely to find contraband on black motorists, 69% on white motorists. That's just a 4% spread. It's not significant. It just shows a reversal of the trend. And then this last year, what's important to note, two things. More likely than ever to actually find contraband. So they found it over 80% of the time on both races of motorists, 80% on black drivers, 83% on white drivers. So you're going in 2015 where cops are, number one, finding contraband like 50, 60% of the time, less often for black drivers, to the next year where they're finding it about 70% of the time and equally on drivers of both races. Then the year after that, 80% of the time and equally on both races. So it's an improvement that's sustained over 2 calendar years, that's gone up in the overall efficacy of the searches, and that's closed the gap in the racial divide.
Contraband is always drugs, or is it ever?
Yeah, I mean, and so here's the thing, and it's worth bringing up, is that in our case, in Burlington, like this, the state police, they should offer their own account. Like, our cops don't go into these car stops thinking they're going to find the motherload of heroin or the kilo coming up from New York City. Almost all the time, it's marijuana related. The officers know that, and we've said it. Like, when marijuana becomes legal here in short order, it's going to really. I mean, someone can say, the officer can say, "I smell marijuana on you," and the driver can say, "Yes, you do, because I smoked it at home half an hour ago." Or not. Wait, they probably say a few hours ago. What cause does that give you to go further? And the answer is much, much, much less or none, right? Very little. So I think a lot of the searches throughout the state of Vermont, not just in Burlington, are going to go down because this won't offer a level of criminal suspicion anymore.
So so then it wouldn't be a pretext for stopping somebody anymore? I mean, because I would think it could. An officer could think of it in terms of like
impairment,
public safety and impairment.
Well, right. So I don't know what you're going to say, Bob. I don't want to.
That was a different question. No.
So to answer your question, it's not a pretext. It's just a thing worth saying a pretext is the traffic violation, right, or the reason for the stop, and then the reason to go further is the criminal suspicion that the smell of marijuana arouses. I think I don't know what the judges are going to say. But thinking about what they might say, the judge would say the simple smell of marijuana in and of itself is the smell of a substance that is legal to possess and consume in our state. So what else was at work that allowed you to take the search further? And it would have to be something like noticeable impairment, like the body camera, the evidence would have to show slurred speech, watery eyes, really bad driving, indicating, impairment, or a quantity of marijuana that's illegal, which is going to be, more than 2 ounces, something like that in personal possession? The chief is looking at other people. So it's going to be, what's that? More than an ounce. So if the person, for some reason, like a la Cheech and Chong, had like a pound of marijuana in the back. Right. That's still, or smoke, right, indicating, so thank you. Like something, if smoke is coming out, like indicating recent consumption of marijuana, that's different. You're not allowed to smoke it in a car. But it will foreclose an avenue of criminal investigation that's been open for a while. And I think it will change the course of car stops in Vermont. What was your question?
As far as the searches go, do you break them down by consent?
Yeah, so these are two types of searches. These are consent searches. We don't break out consent, but we break searches apart in other ways. I don't know if you want to talk, you've done a lot of work on that.
Can I just follow up before you?
Yeah, please.
Yeah. So if you, when you train the officers, do you tell them they have to have probable cause before they ask for consent?
No.
Yeah.
So there's reasonable suspicion and there's probable cause.
No, I know the distinction.
Right, no, yeah.
And so officers might conduct a consent-based search that, was prompted by reasonable suspicion or probable cause, and we track those separately. So what you're looking at here are searches where the driver consented to a search. So there's no search warrant-based searches here. And both, these are including both reasonable suspicion and probable cause-based consent searches.
So do you break them down by black and white as far as reasonable suspicion versus probable cause on the consent? I think the consent is a concern for a lot of judges at times.
Right.
Yeah, the tricky thing is really, to create a line between reasonable suspicion and probable cause, I think it can get a little bit.
You can't stop the car with at least without reasonable suspicion.
Well, you could stop the car for probable cause you've committed a traffic violation.
Sure, but reasonable suspicion is a lower standard, so you got to at least have reasonable suspicion.
Yeah, and so all
for
these
the
searches are going to be based off at least reasonable suspicion. It's either
Well, the
reasonable
stop
suspicion-
the question is, when you go on to push the person to have.
No,
a search.
there is a distinction. So you have to have probable cause you've committed a traffic violation. Like, there's no reasonable suspicion of a traffic
You
violation.
can stop a car based on reasonable suspicion.
Of a crime?
Yeah.
Not a traffic violation, right. So either one of those two.
But once we stop the car and we decide to pursue a search,
Yep.
the decision to pursue the search would be reasonable suspicion or probable cause that there's something illegal going on within the car that we want to search for. Yeah.
All right, thank you.
And so, I don't know, Mike, if you want to talk about, as a detective investigator and a person with, just 20 years in the Burlington Police per se, like how you think that the new marijuana laws might change police behavior at car stops?
Well, it's gonna change it significantly because, first off, during the interim, we're gonna be dealing with canines that have been trained to alert to marijuana, and so there's gonna be difficulty in distinguishing if a dog is called to alert on a car, whether the dog's alerting for cocaine or heroin or marijuana.
Yeah, the dog doesn't alert in different ways based on different drugs, he just alerts.
An alert. So, in order to go further on that investigation, we're gonna have other clues, other information that's gonna build, the probable cause, whether we're gonna seize the vehicle or whether we're gonna apply for a warrant or further investigate. So, I think that my guess is we're gonna run into it a lot where officers are gonna stop cars for one particular thing. They're gonna smell marijuana, whether it's fresh marijuana, they're gonna smell in a bag, or they're gonna smell burnt marijuana. And I guess we're gonna have to make assessments about whether or not we have enough information as to whether the amount that we think in the car is a criminal amount, which I'm not sure how we're gonna distinguish that without other information that we have, whether it's information from some sort of an informant or, a tip that was called in, or just, a variety of other information. I think that we're gonna probably have to walk away from those traffic stops without any sort of further investigation. But it's certainly gonna be challenging and we're working right now and trying to determine what is our policy gonna be here as it relates to marijuana in investigations. How are we gonna train the folks to respond to these sorts of situations when we've now stopped a car for a violation and we have this other element of, maybe green, unburnt marijuana smell that could be 2 pounds of marijuana, it could be.
Right, but it's not just a simple smell will no longer be an indication of a crime.
Right.
And I think it's important that when we talk about marijuana, the number one thing is public safety. And the number one thing with public safety marijuana is operating a vehicle. 1 out of 4 people killed, 1 out of 4 drivers killed fatally last year in Vermont had elevated levels of THC in his or her system. Learned that today. I have the facts. Hold on.
Just that or anything else?
Oh, is what, I can hand you the, Of Vermont's 63 fatal motor vehicle crashes in 2017, 1 in 4 had the presence of THC, the main mind-altering ingredient found in the cannabis plant. That's the Vermont Department of Health putting that out. So I'm just saying, not to draw a conclusion about that here, but that's what we're concerned about. So if that's true, it's not the simple smell that matters, it's how is the driver acting, right? Is a driver acting like a driver who can safely convey a vehicle? And if the answer is yes, I'm just telling, I mean, Mike's puzzling through it. We're not going to have much to go on at the roadside, right? It's not about just like getting marijuana off the streets at all costs. Now, soon corporations will be making huge profits off marijuana here in Vermont in no time. So, long way to say it, and it's kind of what you started by asking, is that most of these searches are for marijuana. They're based on probable cause or reasonable suspicion that marijuana is in the vehicle. And when marijuana becomes legal, that avenue will be foreclosed to police. I predict you will see a decrease statewide and here in searches, period. Next slide, Eric. So, imperfect data. This is the case anywhere. It's important to realize the limit. Actually, I know Nancy, I know you did a great job of encapsulating this. If you want to talk about, and you've been wrestling with our imperfect data, so
yes.
I don't know if you want to talk about our imperfect
data. This has been a
data.
big part of this project. When we looked at 2017's data more carefully, we found a number of issues, especially with searches, that the way it was coded in the data was illogical. It would say, like, it's not a search, but they found contraband or something like that. And so when we looked through, we found these errors, and it made us more cautious about looking back at past years. So we audited the searches for 2017 and 2016 and 2015, but the years before that we're less sure about. And there were all sorts of errors. Like the chief said, any sort of data set is going to have some errors, but they included transcription errors when just records wrote something that was different from what the paper ticket had. Interpretation errors. We read the narratives of these incidents and found that sometimes the driver would hand contraband to an officer. The officer would say there was contraband found, but it wasn't officially a search. And so we excluded those from the search count. And then also there were ticketing errors where if an officer stopped a car and searched for drugs and then only gave a ticket for the drugs but not for the traffic violation, it just wasn't showing up in our data set of traffic tickets. So we included those searches as well because they did originate from a traffic stop. So we just found enough of these that it made us cautious about trusting past years of data, and it's something going forward we're going to think about.
Yeah, and so you're saying, I mean, we very thoroughly audited 2016 and 2017. We took a good look at 2015, but the data from 2012, 2013, 2014, we'd rather have accurate data here now, closer to the present time. But this is not a new thing. I mean, this is, Professor Seguino brought this up in a lot of her analyses. And frankly, a lot of police departments say, oh, our data is no good, so you can't draw too many conclusions from it. Like, I'm not exactly comfortable with that. I'd rather draw the conclusions that we can draw off the best data we have. I'm saying a lot of folks offer a defense to the disparities, saying, well, there are disparities, but the data's not good. Like, no, I want good data. I mean, I'll take the best estimates we have, we'll conduct our audits, and we'll go with what we know. And so we think our data in recent years is actually pretty robust. But one of the things we worry about is that data in the past might be better or worse. I mean, there were like successful searches that I'm sure were missed in 2012 across races. I'm just not going to invest hours of like precious analyst time in looking at what happened in 2012 when like 15, 16, 17 is more instructive.
I mean, data collection is required by law.
Right.
Maybe we should go back and update the law to say it needs to be good data.
Right. I mean, and I think that, you're right about that. I think our data is getting better every year, and I think we have like a staff that like audits our data. I think that a lot of police departments in Vermont comply with the law as best they can, and I don't want to speak for, but there are 5, 6, 7, 10, 12 person police departments. They and a lot of them make traffic enforcement a big part of what they do. I'd love for them to have more accurate data. All I'm saying is I think comparatively our data is probably pretty good.
It's been talked about as a model, absolutely.
Yeah, and the state police are excellent at getting on top of their data. Next slide. Room for improvement. So it's important to note, like, we're not here to say, I'm not going to get on an aircraft carrier or a lawn and say mission accomplished, because it's not. There's still disparity within policing. there's still disparity within the county, within our city, and within the country. I mean, there's no way around that. Like, people of color bear an oversized burden in a lot of different ways in our state, and you see it when they go to get a cup of coffee or not at Starbucks. So the point is, it's not, hey, we're done here. It's that we made important, we become more self-aware. We made progress in very, very important ways within the police department, but it's part of an overall upward trend and a continuing path towards more self-awareness. So one of the things that is important to note is that black drivers are stopped more often as a percent of the population than white drivers. So we'd like to get a better handle on that. One of our next projects is going to be, as Eric Cradaville brings up, is it equipment violations? Is it expired registration? Is it expired inspection? What's driving the difference in the stop rate? We also want to see if we can do what's called a veil of darkness test, which is in the middle of the night, the chances of you knowing who's driving by race behind the wheel are significantly diminished. During the day, you're more likely to know who's driving. So does the disparity in who's stopped persist across the hours of the day? Or does it diminish at night and increase during the day? Right? That's an important test that I know the Crime Research Group in Montpelier does, that we're interested in doing. We're also, like Bob alluded to, want to know why different races. Is there a difference by type of violation? So that will be helpful. And also, blacks are searched 7% of the time during stops, and whites are searched 1% of the time. That type of disparity exists year to year, consistently. In fact, this is on the high end. So that is something that we want to understand. The gold standard is, when you do the search, are you getting the contraband? We want to understand why we're developing probable cause and reasonable suspicion across races in the first place. And is it a bias towards, and I've said this many times, do you smell marijuana coming out of a car that's driven by 2 white students with a UVM sticker and not pursue that lead, although you would have found contraband? But you, with the same fact pattern with 2 black occupants, pursue the lead, right? That's something to think about, right? Why folks would bear more of a burden for that reason.
Could you do an audit going back for the time of day of some of the old data?
Yeah, I mean, the time of day is definitely something I can find. The veil of darkness methodology is a bit complicated.
Right.
But it is possible to look at.
Yeah, and that's not to say we don't want to do it. It's just like if a university were to come in and do it, they charge, like University of Albany does veil of darkness tests if you pay them for it, and it's thousands and thousands of dollars. Right? So it's not. I think my folks are up to it, but it's not something we could just like have by next week or next month.
And also, it's intended to look at disparities in stop rates. So, the decision to pull over a car as opposed to what happens downstream of, after the car's been pulled over. Because, daylight or nighttime, when you get up to the window, you're going to have a pretty good idea of the race of the driver. And so the question is, are police officers targeting drivers of color more than white drivers with that decision to initially pull them over?
Well, yeah, I mean, and we want answers to all the questions about what happens afterwards, too, all the way down to when they end up in jail.
Interestingly, a little over a year ago, when I was out of grad school, I was working on a programming project, and I actually essentially did that study. I took Vermont State Police had like 240,000 traffic stops over the course of like 5 years, and I did a study to basically look at the proportion of the traffic stops by race, and I actually found the highest proportion of minority stops at nighttime. So it was essentially like around 10 p.m. until about 5 a.m. is where I saw a higher proportion.
And they're on the highway, too. That's another factor.
Where it's harder to, it's interesting. We have ambient light on our streets, so it might be we have less of an effect of veil of darkness versus the interstate where people are going maybe 80, 85 miles an hour being pulled over.
What year did you look at that?
I just looked over basically, I want to say it was 2012 until like the end of 2016 or somewhere, maybe it's 2011. It was about 5 years worth of data.
So one thing there's 2 things to note. I don't know what the next slide is. There may not be a next slide, right? So just go back. Yeah. So 2 things to note. One is that the amount of searches has gone down slightly year to year, but it hovers at about 50. So in 2015, there were 53 searches of motorists citywide total for the year. In 2016, if you can add the numbers up on the back, it's 54. Last year it was 50. So it's a rare thing for all races, considering that we make anywhere from 3,000 to 5,000 traffic stops. And if you look at if we care about like the lived experience of Vermonters and Vermonters of color, the disparities are real, the outcomes are real, the problems with suspensions are real. But we had 20 black motorists searched last year, 15 the year prior, 13 the year prior. So it's once every 18 to 19 days this happens to one person. That's a real thing. It's real for them. I think when we think about really, really troubling things like stop, question, and frisk in New York, you're talking about a city of 8 million, 600,000 stop, questions, and frisks. That's a much more invasive practice than our stops. It's not diminishing the importance of what's going on, but every fewer stop or each unsuccessful stop that doesn't occur, meaning when we don't get, each unsuccessful search or each fewer search is like a measurable difference in the lived experience of the population of people being searched. So although the small numbers have small effects, each decrease in that number has a big effect on the total. I mean, that's if you follow what I'm saying. Do you follow what I'm saying? Because I'm not being precise. The other thing is that there are fewer stops happening than ever. I think that one of the things that cops see is that their stops will be scrutinized. You can talk about their experience in traffic court. I mean, a lot of cops say that they have a very, very hard time prevailing in traffic court, no matter how much they prepare. That's a whole story for another time. But we've seen since 2015 a 40% decrease in the number of stops total across all races. So we're stopping 40% fewer motorists. And what's interesting about that is that accidents have not gone up. So one of the conversations I've had with my officers is if you're doing stops to promote traffic safety and you're doing many, many, many fewer stops and the accident rate is staying the same, we have to consider how vital this is as an intervention, because it's an intervention against everyday people. Motorists are motorists. They're your mom, your kids, your neighbor, and it's very stressful for them, and it has serious consequences. And when we do them, apparently, whether we do a lot or a little or 40% fewer, it's not changing the accident rate. We just have to think about them as an intervention and whether they're worth it or not. Not to say that they're not worth it. They are, but we have to be careful. Would it be more important just to go after red lights and stop signs and unsafe lane changes, and less so about equipment, less so about inspections, right? It's important asking, like, how does an expired inspection make the road more dangerous? How does insurance, I'm going to be firm on, you got to have insurance. If these are machines that could hurt someone. But registration, not paying Vermont for registration does not necessarily make the road less safe. So we have to contend with that. I think these are important questions. And lastly, I promised I'd give the caveat that there are big social implications to suspended licenses. If you think about what getting a ticket means, you want to fight. If you don't want to fight it, you got to pay it. It's expensive. Poverty and race intersect across America as well as here in Vermont. It's harder for people in poverty to pay. We have a regressive ticketing system. Whether you drive a Lamborghini and a Tesla or a 25-year-old Hyundai, same price for the ticket, right? But your ability to pay is vastly different. If you want to fight the ticket, number one, you have to be able to appear in traffic court during business hours, which is when most people work. So you have to be able to take a day off of work. It means you have to work the type of job where the boss will give you the day off, and you have to work the type of job where you can afford to take the day off. Then you have to go there and have the courage to either, number one, the money to hire a lawyer. If you have the money to hire the lawyer, maybe you just want to pay the ticket. I don't know. But you have to have the money to hire a lawyer. You have to know how to find a lawyer. You have to know how to engage with the lawyer, which for a new American or refugee or English as a second language person is difficult. And if you can't afford a lawyer, you have to go and argue the ticket yourself. So cops will say, listen, when I go to traffic court, I always feel like I flip a coin about whether I'm on the winning end or losing end. That's a cop going in with glum prospects. Imagine a person who doesn't want to take the day off, whose boss wants them back at work, who doesn't have the money to pay the ticket, who can't afford a lawyer, and doesn't know the court system going into that. It's very intimidating. So I know that the AG, T.J. Donovan, had a license restoration program. It was a very short duration. It was kind of a one-time thing. I think that the state, programmatically, if it cares about equity, has to take a more comprehensive look at why it suspends people's licenses, and what the consequences are, and whether it means it or not. it goes hand in hand with equity. So that's kind of the thought. I know, you know, you've asked questions along the way, but if you have any other questions, I guess this would be a good time to bring them out. Nope. All right, and again, this will be a continuous thing, right? It's not, we did our traffic stop analysis and we're done. It's just the first installment, so you can look forward to more. Thank you.
Thank you. So we already got through the chief's report?
Yep.
Right.
Okay.
Yep.
So next is review of incoming correspondence.
We kind of agreed last meeting that we wouldn't read through them. You guys all had them, so if there's questions, feel free to reach out or bring them up now. But again, we have another round of wonderful remarks from community members about their interactions with officers and their going out of their way to make a difference. And
Could we hear like one or two of them? It's nice to hear that.
this is from a local gentleman who wrote to the chiefs to say he wanted to share a very positive experience he had with Officer Bartle, who's a new officer. I think she's been in the department for about a year. This gentleman had not been involved with the initial outreach, but worked to support Sarah and the victims behind the scenes. Officer Bartle went out of her way to keep him up to date so that he could do his job as a friend and a counselor. She's exactly the kind of person we want in uniform: personable, confident, exudes competence. And her efforts resulted in a 1-year restraining order issued, and now she believes she will make an arrest. The case could have led to a homicide given what the suspect was saying and doing. She was convinced, and so was Aaron. So you're doing solid work, brings in young cops like Aaron. Well done. So it was also a compliment to the chiefs. Some of the others are a bit longer. I don't know if you want to get further into them. But they're, you know, it's often every week I'm getting reports from.
Yeah, that's good to know. It's good to hear.
Another detective, Damdar, and Lieutenant Warren's, their efforts in a recent case related to deaths of children. Their support and encouragement process made a huge difference. And it helped bring justice in the case. Jessie was new at the time, and she was running. She did not disappoint. She's a hero to me. I thank you for believing the case, not just that she's in this over my words. Huge gratitude.
Good. And so next is an update on the process involving officer complaints. I know we reviewed packets and then, I don't know, were we going to do it again periodically? Was that the plan?
That's the plan.
Okay.
Still in the process of doing that, right? I don't know,
Yeah.
Chief, right? We're talking about the review of the complaints. I know we divvied them out among the members of the commission. Have we met with all the members of the commission about all the open complaints?
What did we do, 2017? We haven't done 2018 yet.
Just done one set.
Yeah,
We
I did one set.
We all got
Have
one
everybody done
set.
one set?
I think everyone's done that one set, but that was a while ago, I guess, is.
I mean,
So-
do you know how many more complaints we've gotten in 2018? No, not
But
right
I
now.
can give you a month.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe we could just plan to follow up on that at the next meeting.
Okay. And I don't mean to, not to give it short shrift, you wanted to discuss Stephanie Seguino's report.
Oh, right, yeah.
So I thought it would be good to, in conjunction with that, discuss our report, but I didn't mean to preclude comments on Stephanie's.
I mean, and I think what I might do, you know, I was realizing that some people might not have read it.
Right.
And so maybe since we had the presentation about this department,
Sure.
we could make sure everybody has a chance to look it over. I mean, she does have at the beginning, like her main points or whatever, but I think it might be good for people to look at it and then maybe follow up at the next meeting and have a conversation about
And
it.
so I sent out links to her recent report and the one from the year prior as well. They were out, they were in the commission email, so you can just get them right there online.
Yeah, I think it would be good. I mean, I think I've actually been involved in both, obviously looking at it here, but also on a statewide perspective
Yeah.
too. And there's a lot of stuff going on about that right now. So I think it's important for us to continue to talk about it.
Sure. So we'll add that to the next month's agenda.
And
But
I
it-
mean,
yeah.
I don't know if, we could mention it to her. Last time I heard from her was when she sent the report.
Well, I asked her if she wanted to come tonight. I told her that I sent her this to review, and I said that we were going to discuss her report, and this one, she said she'd have to pass tonight, but she's always engaged on this.
Right, so maybe we could let her know, and if she wants to come to the next one, yeah, it's always nice to have her. Okay. So where are we? Commissioners' updates or comments? I've told people and, let people know that I was the chair of the Attorney General's panel on racial disparities in the criminal and juvenile justice system. And it was an advisory panel, and we submitted a report, and then I resigned. So, and the vice chair resigned too. It was kind of dramatic, but, and so I think that they're in the process of replacing the chair and the vice chair. But a lot of times, these conversations, and of course, the statewide information is something that we're having conversations about all the time, And I just resigned because if anybody has seen the charge, it's huge. And doing it as a volunteer was just too much. I just feel like the work isn't going to get the justice it needs with volunteers. And I'm also just kind of cutting back on volunteering. So anyway, I took it 6 months and then resigned, and I think the work is going to go on. But anyway, I just wanted to let people know about that. And I'm not the Community Justice Center anymore, but I'm still involved in a lot of things in the community. So I just wanted to share that with people. Does anybody else have anything? Any updates or anything? No?
I had one question, just Chief, anything new on the fair and impartial policing? Any changes from,
No,
nothing happening?
I'm not trying to, we sent our response to the federal government at that level and haven't heard back from them. All the policy and some of the materials. We have Mike, in fact, if you want to talk about the training for fair and impartial policing, that's basically ready to go. Our in-house.
Yeah, it is ready to go. We're just block training right now, so officers are cycling through their week of block training to get all the required things that the police academy mandates that we get every year or every other year. So we're finishing that up, and then we're trying to implement that hopefully in late May or June. But it's definitely on top of the list of things, as well as another training around disorderly conduct arrests. Just want to be presenting information to officers, updates on case law, things like that.
Yeah, and that's a good point. We're talking about fair and impartial policing generally. If you remember from last summer, one of the issues that the ACLU had, it made the news, was that they felt that we were making unfair disorderly conduct arrests, and that had a disproportionate impact on people of color. What we found is that most law in Vermont is fairly straightforward. Murder is murder, assault is assault. I'm simplifying it a little bit. Disorderly conduct really, and I see the prosecutor.
That's the toughest one to charge.
The toughest one to charge. I can even have you talk about it, because you have to know the case law. The statute, if you just go by the statute, you're not going to be able.
Behavior?
What's that?
Tumultuous?
Yeah, what does that mean in practice? What does abusive behavior mean? What does loud, what does unreasonable noise mean? And it varies from county to county. So we're finding that cops trained at the police academy are just trained in the statute. They don't go any further because different counties have different case law. It's not like completely different across the state, but it does vary. We found that our young officers, who are the ones out there on the street more likely to make these arrests, didn't understand the case law, and it wasn't their fault. No one had taken the time here or there to tell them, this is what unreasonable noise means in practice when a jury gets their instructions. This is what a tumult or fighting means. This is what abusive language means. So we're hoping that officers, when they do make disorderly conduct arrest, will be able to make the right discernment and cite the right case law. And I've been in touch with the ACLU, letting them know we've identified that that correction. And I got to stress, it's not just because the union walked in. It wasn't, the cops didn't have the knowledge to make the right charging decisions, and it was an oversight, and we're going to give it to them. As far as the fair and impartial policing policy training, one of the things, the cops know the skeleton of it already, but the training is good because it gives several scenarios about you encounter a person at the roadside and you believe that they're undocumented, or ICE calls you and says, we need to know when this person is going to get released with a citation, or whatever the answer is. They have to, it's scenario-based about encounters that cops typically engage in, so that we can make sure that in that very practical way, they know when they can and can't contact the federal government, and when they can and can't prolong a detention and everything like that. And that's going out right after the block training. That's a document we can share with you. It's not a secret by any means.
But I mean, there's still that language in there that says that if they want to, they can, right?
That's the federal law,
Yeah, yeah.
right? I mean,
Right.
I know it's from the city attorney to the state's attorney to the state attorney general. Like that's the federal law.
Right.
We cannot prevent officers from communicating about immigration status with the federal government. But anytime any cop communicates with the federal government here, period, we want to know about it. You can't just be off calling the feds on your own. So if they do it, our interpretation of the law is that we can't say in advance you have to go to supervisor. You can exercise your rights under the federal law, but you have to tell the supervisor what you've done. So that will be department policy. And that's not to single out immigration per se. It's like if any of us found out you were just off calling the FBI on your own, we'd take issue with that too. And so I know there is that tension about their ability to communicate, but that's the law. And what they can't do as a way of treating people fairly is pretty robust. You can't prolong a detention, right? You can't inquire about immigration status unless it narrowly relates to a criminal investigation, which it often doesn't. You can't hold on to someone I don't even know how it would. You can't hold on to someone for a civil detainer, right? You can only act when there's a criminal warrant for an immigration violation signed by a judge, right? These are all things that go a long way to protecting our crime victims and our witnesses and people at the roadside who are undocumented. And just, I think the sentiment is the cops, it doesn't weigh on them heavily for two reasons. Number one, we're not in an agricultural enclave here where we see a lot of undocumented workers, and our cops have never been focused on immigration enforcement ever to begin with. Like I check in, I'm sorry to just use Eugene, but Eugene is a union delegate. I check in with the union often saying, is this an issue? Are cops contending with it? I mean, I don't know. You don't have to, if you want to say anything, feel free, but.
Not that I've heard. It's not,
Right.
It has not been an issue at all.
Right. Cops aren't like, man, I let one get away. It's not, we're fortunate in that way. I mean, I think our cops would rise to the test of being fair, but it's not this thing that's happening often.
Chief, can I just add a couple things?
Please.
One, with both those trainings, those are both areas that become really high liability for the officers, and so we want to make sure they have all the information they can to make the right decision. We don't want them to be violating federal law. We don't want to, not explain that to them, but we also don't want to be violating the rights of the folks that they're encountering. And as it relates to the disorderly conduct arrests, they're the ones at 2 o'clock in the morning when there's 2,000, 3,000 drunk college kids downtown, and you have a couple of people yelling and hollering and posturing and screaming. And when you go to arrest those folks, it usually involves some sort of physical encounter where the officer can get hurt, somebody else can get hurt. If we're making unreasonable seizures as it relates to the Fourth Amendment, that opens us up to liability. And so we really feel it's important for them to understand the case law as it relates around these arrests so that they know, this is a case that is not going to be recognized by the court due to this case law as, a lawful arrest, and therefore I'm not going to make an arrest in this case because it's not going to stick, and I could get hurt, the other person could get hurt, it could open on myself or the department up to, liability and those sort of things. So they're both very important trainings for two completely different reasons, but, both very important for the folks that are out there to be aware of and think about, so.
I mean, and I know that there are a lot of ways that officers interact and you know, intervene in situations like that, short of arresting them. Even the presence of them downtown has an impact. So, you know, there's a lot of other things that can happen, de-escalating situations that don't end up in arrest, and I've seen that happen.
You know, sometimes it has a positive impact,
Yeah.
sometimes it has a negative
Yeah.
impact. You know, so it really depends on who the individuals are,
Mhm.
both the officers, who the individuals that are being sorely, you know, there's so many factors that come into play. But we really feel after looking at this and seeing the liability that the officers are, you know, these positions they're put into with increased liability, that we're doing them a disservice if we're not keeping them informed with the case law and how it relates to the arrests that they're making, so.
I had just one more follow-up on the vehicle, what are we calling this vehicle?
Emergency response vehicle.
Emergency response vehicle. I had expressed a little bit of concern last week, just that I'm still just kind of mulling that around, but I'm wondering if there's an opportunity to see it. You had mentioned, I thought, that maybe the commission could.
Yeah, right now it's at a secret location. I'm just kidding. So, 7 days, actually read the commission minutes and then wrote a story about it. I don't know if you saw that. So loose lips sink ships, but so there's a photo of it in 7 days,
Okay.
but I'm not trying to be.
How they get a photo of it?
What's that?
And on the wraps, doesn't it?
No, yeah, they had to sneak it. It's in the warehouse with the hood up. Yeah, I don't know how they got in. You know, we're looking at a whole separate. I'm just kidding. We're not looking at them for anything. But it was at. It's either at DPW at their garage there or out at the airport until we're ready to roll it out. I know that it at this point I think it's at DPW. We got it. They made. On one side of the truck, the New Jersey fabricator got camel's hump wrong, and we just cannot have that reversed. So we have to drive the thing back down to New Jersey to get camel's hump the right way.
That's a story
It's
for
there
7
now?
days.
Yeah.
Oh, it's
The
there.
guy was like, "What's the difference?" I'm like, "That's camel's hump, buddy. We're on the west side of camel's hump, you know."
That would be big trouble, Chief. It really
Yeah,
would
no
be.
kidding. So that's where it is today, right? Then it's coming back. The question is, do you want to see it at the community barbecue, or do you want like a commissioner's preview? I mean, that's the question.
Barbecue's fine for me.
Barbecue's fine, but it will be definitely rolled out for everyone to see at the barbecue.
I only wanted to see it because I wanted to try to allay concerns about how it's going to be used.
No, that's fine.
Once I see it, it may be fine,
Yeah.
or it may not be, but I thought seeing it first would be a useful
Sure.
first thing to do.
No, and I'd be amenable to that. I mean, I'd love to, and I'm being serious, it's to have a tour for the commission, or to have the officers that run the truck, give an orientation just to the police commission. Or we could do it in a night where we can let the public know we'll be doing the orientation, and we can have part of our meeting. I don't know what you can do about the cameras, but we're going to have our meeting maybe outside for a bit in good weather if it ever becomes spring. So yes, in the next 4 weeks, it'll be at the barbecue, and you'll be able to see it beforehand.
That's fine.
Yeah.
I actually have one other question. I noticed something on the news, and the Vermont State Police was like announcing that they were like figuring out a new way to deal with officers after they've been involved in a critical incident.
Right.
And it sounded like sort of extending the time that they're not back out on the job. And I'm just wondering, like, what's our policy? And like, I'm concerned about wellness. I
Right.
try to bring it up as often as I remember.
Yeah, I mean, the state police were putting officers or troopers back in the field pretty quickly after shootings. Then we had, a trooper who was involved in multiple shootings, and then two of them very close to each other. And they realized that that's a very risky thing and just not good for the officer. I know you work with Sonny often about this. You're probably the best person to speak to this.
Well, our protocol for the most part has been, the officer needs to take some time to move on recollected events, but needs to take some time for himself.
It's in a matter of weeks, yeah. Right. So the first thing the officer does is either goes to the hospital or gets medically cleared by a paramedic, right, in the aftermath. To make sure they're okay, get their vitals. Then, in the coming few days.
Sunny.
Sonny might refer them to someone else or might say, listen, they have their head about them. And then it's weeks before they go back to the field. Number one, for investigatory reasons. Number two, just to, we put them in a place, we keep them here at headquarters and just see how they're doing. And luckily, I mean, knock on wood, this is not a very frequent thing.
But it's good to know. I thought that, I mean, we've talked about that before, but it was just good to know. Okay. I mean, I think the next thing that we have is an update on encouraging attendance. I mean, always do that. As a matter of fact, there was a friend of mine that was going to come tonight, but she's not here. And in all of the different, community things that I'm involved in, I always encourage people to come. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. I know that there's a lot of people that it's easier for me to get them to show up at the library for like one of the Kaleo things and say that you guys. So we'll continue to do those. We're not necessarily going to do it every once a month, but at least maybe a few over the summer. But I do encourage people to come. I think a lot of people don't even know that it's a public meeting and they can be here. But
You know what? Why doesn't between Laura and I, we'll use social media, Twitter and Facebook, or maybe if we can do it.
I'll certainly continue to do that.
Would you still want to have Jarlath Dunn come for the next one in hopes that might get people here? Or?
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, I still definitely want to have him come. So.
Is he going to be at the? Is he going to be?
That's a great question.
I've reached out. I need to follow up again. I hadn't heard back from Michael last week, so it's on my list to follow up again, see if he'll come and do some demos there.
Or at least, like, maybe contracting with them in an emergency if we need to, or going to do a search of some sort.
That at the same time that you roll out I always go to say tactical vehicle, but I'm not supposed to say.
Oh, I mean, I don't, listen, if we're not calling it a tactical vehicle behind your back, so, I mean, rest assured. I think that would be sensory overload.
What's going on?
I think that one of the
We don't know.
launching the drone on the truck. No.
Yeah, really.
No, that would be great.
I also think that it's really important for people to understand. Like a couple of times I've heard you say, Chief, like, if we had this in this situation, this could. That part of it,
Well, that's right. I mean, there's instances of folks using.
That's with the attorney. I expect this. I expect an amended decision to issue this minutes from last month. Well, I don't know about that.
I know, I can't even say that.